Oh my goodness gracious. Here we are. It is 9:45 on the AM dial. And you know what that means? It's time for Java with Jen. Java with Jen. I'm so glad it's getting warmer and I can have iced coffee. Can I just say that? And the special place I go to, their ice cubes are made out of iced coffee. No watering down my iced coffee, ma'am. Anyway, if you haven't met me, my name's Jen Koken, and I am your favorite executive leadership coach working with women in science, technology, engineering, and math to lead with more authority, influence, and impact. And I am very excited because all month long, my guest is going to be Shirley Bloomfield. She is the president of the National Rural Broadband Association, NTCA. I'm looking at my notes, which is the premier association representing nearly 850 independent, community-based telecom companies that are leading innovation in rural and small town America. Shirley and I met about 8 years ago. We began working together, and she has a special gift for having her eye on empowering the women around her. And of those 850, she can correct me when she comes on, I think 64 are led by women, and she's always doing special programs for her female CEOs. And that's how we've been working together so long. And I just was part of her launch for her book club, and her book club is reading my book, shameless plug, Make Imposter Syndrome Your Superpower. So let me bring Shirley on, and please, please, please help me welcoming Shirley Bloomfield. All right, let's go. And here we are.
All right.
There we go. Hey, Shirley. How are you?
Hey, Jen. Nice to be with you. I got my coffee too.
What does that say? Nasty woman?
Nasty
I like
woman.
I love it. Well, thank you. I know how incredibly busy you are, and you're always like flying around and giving keynotes. I really appreciate you being here today. And it's interesting because you were with NTCA for 20 years, then you took a brief respite into another telecom arm for a couple of years, and then went back to NTCA as the CEO, which is why I wanted to have you on all month to be a part of this conversation about board dynamics and navigating board dynamics. And by the way, Shirley is going to be my guest for this month's Empowering Expert series, which is going to be Thursday, May 22nd at 11 a.m. But I thought we would just start kind of giving a context or umbrella today. What was it like for you? Because you've been the CEO now for 15 years, but do you remember what it was like in the beginning, knowing that you're now reporting to the board and walking into your first board meeting?
Wow, what a transformation, right? I mean, and partially because having spent 20 years as a staff person for this association, where the boardroom was the inner sanctum and, staff was really, you were allowed to come in for very specific purposes. So the board became a little bit mysterious. So a lot of it for me was unpacking the mystery of who the board was and then figuring out kind of what my role was going to be to help guide, to partner, but also recognizing that I reported to 12 individuals and what was that going to be like. So honestly, the first thing that I did is knowing that I had to make this transformation, knowing that even with a break in my career at NTCA, I needed to reintroduce myself to these people. They needed to see me as their leader. Sure, they hired me, but I needed to reaffirm for them that it was the right decision. So one of the first things I did is I actually did one-on-ones with every single board member.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm such a relationship building person. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. I got excited.
Yeah, it's totally my jam. I'm a dot connector. I'm a relationship person. So really getting on with each one of them and taking an hour or two and really taking notes for myself on what drove them. Why did they run for the board? What did they want to accomplish? What were their goals? And then thinking through how I could incorporate that into my work with the board. So that was a really great fast track for me to understand where their heads were at as individuals, and then to collectively think about, okay, given that, how do I then guide them with the things that I see as their day-to-day leader? I mean, it's really different, right? Because I see all of the boulders on the road, they kind of swoop in once a month and kind of swoop in and swoop back out. So how do you kind of manage some of that? So that, and to this day, honestly, every time I get a new board member, I still do that. I still take that time. You know,
Yeah,
what drives you? Tell me about your family. Tell me about, your vision for this industry. So,
I love that.
it
And
helped
go ahead. Go ahead.
it helped a lot. I was just gonna say it helped a lot, and I will also share, obviously, I was the first woman to lead the association. Actually, in our 70 years, I'm only the 3rd CEO this association has had. I know,
Whoa.
so longevity is
Whoa.
kind of the jam here. Um, but also, there were no other women around that board table. So really kind of there were a lot of things I was very mindful of as I started my work with the board.
And given you were the only woman around that table, how did you navigate that dynamic in that moment?
Yeah, it's that's an interesting question. I think there's a couple of things. I think first of all, and this goes totally back to your book about making the imposter syndrome your superpower. I became a student of things that I knew that I needed to get up to speed on. Maybe it was that perfectionist thing that you've been talking about, but I knew the things that I knew and that I did well and were the reason I'd gotten the job. But I also knew where some of my Achilles heels were. For example, we
Mhm.
run a huge benefits operation. We have billions of dollars in assets for a pension plan and a group health plan. I had been familiar with them. I was a participant in them, but I now needed to actually work with the trustees of these committees, and knowing that members had entrusted billions of dollars into these funds. I spent my first 2 years as a CEO just diving deep into the areas where I knew I really needed to get up to speed so that I could speak with authority without feeling like I was faking it.
Yeah.
So those were some of the things that I did to kind of really get up there quickly.
And was there anything, I'm looking at some questions that I had. Hold on. I want to make sure we're no, 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 no. We talked about that. Look at this. We're just like, oh, I know. So there's so much we can get into, and we have 4 segments, everybody. So, this is like about kind of basic board, but um, it. I always tell my clients when they're in a new CEO position and reporting to the board, I caught somebody saying she wanted me to go over her board agenda with her. And she said, I just am not sure like how to get through this all to get feedback from the board. And you tell me if I was like on target with this or off. And I said, why are you getting feedback from the board? She looked at me like I had 2 heads. So they hired you to be the expert. I said, don't you already know the direction you want to go? Well, of course. Well, then, even if they give you feedback, are you going to implement all that feedback? Not really. We've been through the whole staff. We know the agenda. We know the trajectory. I said, the board, yes, you want to work with the board, but give them something to react to. Let them know, here's our strategic plan over the next 3 years. Here's the first part. I'd love to, am I missing anything? Here's the first part of it. What am I missing? What questions do you have? Because you're actually getting their buy-in into the direction you want to lead, and they hired you to lead.
It is so true, but I will share with you the dynamics around a board table are fascinating. For example, my first board was a few CEOs, but a lot of directors of our broadband companies. Right now, my board is basically all CEOs. And the one thing that is interesting about CEOs is they have a really hard time following. So you get 12 CEOs sitting around the table, they all want to lead. And so you sometimes do have to, in a collaborative and cooperative manner, um, find that way to gather their feedback, but also kind of to help guide it. And one of the things I have to do pretty much once a year, I make a point of doing hey, let's just do a reminder on what is the role of the board? What is your governance responsibility? Where does your fiduciary responsibilities lie? And let's remember that when we're talking about your role as policy, my role is implementing, how we can kind of collaborate in that space. But when you've got board turnover, you're going to have different personalities, and every
Yeah.
board, just 1 or 2 individuals will really change that sense. So one of the things I try to do, so for example, when I craft a board agenda, my board meets a lot, 4 times a year in person, and every month that we don't meet in person, we meet in a Zoom. I actually do I put the agenda together, but I share it with my officers and I say, hey, just let me know if I'm missing something here. Do you want me to add something? You want to expand a conversation? 99% of the time, looks great. But you know what? I get that buy-in right away because I've
Yeah.
shared it with them. So they're all in when that board meeting kicks off on what we're going to be doing. And so it's kind of an easy way to set the right tone.
I love that. And it's actually a good place to end because I want to talk on the next segment because, not everybody who's going to be watching this is a CEO directly reporting to the board. We also could be serving on a board. And how do you deal with those dynamics or presenting to the board? And how does a person who's not in your position with that cachet by virtue of title, how do you feel empowered walking into a meeting?
Can't
So
wait to talk about it.
okay. I love it. I love it. All right, friends, this has been Java with Jen, myself, and Shirley Bloomfield, who I absolutely adore, and I'm happy to call a friend as well. And we're going to be back next week talking about, let me just make sure I have the theme, the power you give away. So what is it like serving on another board? And, we are talking about the board. However, you could do everything that Shirley has been saying, you could apply to a meeting. And I want to just underpin one thing you said, which is create allies before the meeting. Don't introduce an idea newly, get the buy-in ahead of time. That is probably the gold in my book that we just talked about as we walk away. All right. All right, everybody. See you next time.